There's a man who cannot read or write, not in English, not in any language. For 12 years, he works alone on something no one in recorded history has ever achieved. His wife believes he's lost his mind. His neighbors accuse him of witchcraft. They burn his work. Still, he persists. In 1821, he completes it. He gives his entire people a way to read and write their own language. Within 5 years, the Cherokee achieve a higher literacy rate than the white settlers around them. They publish their own newspaper. They draft their own constitution. They bring their case before the Supreme Court, and they win. And yet, none of it saves them. They lose everything anyway. Picture this. You awaken in the southern Appalachian mountains, not the Appalachians of today, with paved roads and visitor centers, but long before any of that existed, before the United States, before the colonies, before any European had ever set foot on this land. Your eyes open to soft gray, light filtering through a thatched roof. The air carries the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and something cooking over a fire. Outside your winter house, mist clings to the mountain peaks, as if the mountains themselves are breathing. Rolling green valleys stretch in every direction, cut through by rivers so clear you can see the stones at the bottom. This is Cherokee, territory 40,000 square miles that will one day become parts of North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Virginia, and Kentucky. Not wilderness, not untamed land. A carefully managed landscape of towns, farms, and hunting grounds, all linked by trails that follow the curves of the earth like veins through a leaf. You are Cherokee one of the Enion, the principal people. What most don't understand about Cherokee society is its sophistication. Forget the image of simple people living simple lives. That's not this. Your town centers on a massive earthen mound, flat-topped and rising toward the sky. Atop it stands the council house, a huge circular building with 7 sides, one for each of the 7 clans. It holds several hundred people. This isn't just a meeting place. Sits the political and spiritual heart of your world. Here, decisions are made, ceremonies held, and the sacred fire burns. That fire has never gone out. Priests tend it day and night. If it dies, something in the spirit of the people dies with it. Around the council house stand homes too, for each family. A summer house, open and airy to catch the breeze. A winter house, smaller and partially underground, with thick walls of wattle and daub mud and clay woven around wooden frames. In the center, a fire pit sends smoke curling through a hole in the roof. It's warm, comfortable. Beyond the town, along riverbanks, grow the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash, an agricultural system perfected over centuries. Corn stalks rise tall, beans climb them, enriching the soil. Squash spreads below, shading the earth to retain moisture and suppress weeds. Together, they feed thousands. But here's what would have stunned any European. Women hold real power. Cherokee society is matrilineal. Identity, clan, inheritance flow through the mother. Your mother's brother, not your father, is your primary male role model. The home, the fields, the children all belong to your mother. If a marriage ends, the husband leaves with nothing, returning to his mother's house. Women aren't just heads of households. They're political actors. They choose whether the tribe goes to war. A women's council of clan representatives wields genuine authority. At the summit stands the beloved woman one of the highest offices in the nation. She holds a vote in the General Council. She decides the fate of prisoners. When she speaks, people listen because many believe the Great Spirit sometimes speaks through her. Try explaining that to a European in the 1700s, when women in England couldn't own property, vote, or sign contracts without a husband's permission. To the Cherokee, it was European society that seemed backward. Then come the clans, 7 of them, each with sacred roles. The Wolf clan, the largest, produces warriors and war chiefs. Only they may kill a wolf, and only after special rites. The Deer clan are the messengers, fleet of foot, carrying news across mountains and valleys. They hunt deer, but honor them deeply, performing ceremonies of thanks and asking the spirit for forgiveness. The Bird clan serve as intermediaries between earth and sky. They keep sacred feathers, interpret dreams, and read omens in flight patterns. Many medicine people come from this clan. The long-haired clan, sometimes called the Wind or Twister clan, are peace chiefs, diplomats, and the ones who adopt strangers and orphans into the nation. They walk with a distinctive gait, shoulders twisting with each step. The Blue clan are healers, masters of herbal medicine, with knowledge passed through generations. The Wild Potato clan know every edible root and plant in the forest. In famine, they keep the people alive. The Paint clan, the smallest and most secretive, make the sacred red pigment used in war and ceremony. Artists, spiritual leaders, and medicine men emerge from their ranks. Crucially, marriage within your own clan or your father's is forbidden. Clan members are considered siblings. Such unions are incest, punishable by death, not by the state, but by your own family. Justice operates differently too. If someone from the Wolf clan kills someone from the Deer clan, balance must be restored. The Killer's clan provides someone for execution. It need not be the actual killer, because this isn't about revenge. It's about cosmic harmony. This system creates profound accountability. Your actions affect your entire clan. And then there's Godogi communal labor for the good of all. If crops fail, the village helps. If a house burns, everyone rebuilds it. Orphans are raised. Elders are cared for. Strangers are welcomed. No one is ever truly alone. Imagine your morning in this world. You wake before dawn. Embers glow in the hearth. The winter house still warm. You push aside your deer-hide blanket and step into the cold mountain air. Mist hangs thick, you can barely see neighboring houses. You walk to the river. The water is piercingly cold, but this is essential. It's going to water, a daily ritual of spiritual cleansing. You wade in, facing east, praying for the Creator to wash away impurities, physical and spiritual, preparing you for the day. The cold is almost painful, yet clarifying. When you emerge, your skin tingles. You feel clean, alive, connected to something greater. Back in town, the day begins. Women head to the fields with hoes and baskets. The corn is tall, beans climb, squash spreads. Men prepare to hunt. Deer have been sighted north of the valley. They fast and pray, asking the deer spirits for permission, because animals have spirits too and must be respected. By midday, the mist has burned off. The mountains stand sharp against a blue sky. Children play near the council house. Elders weave baskets from river geometric patterns dyed in colors that glow. Inside the council house, leaders meet, discussing trade, harvests, the upcoming green corn ceremony, the most sacred event of the year. Old fires will be extinguished, old debts forgiven. The community reborn as evening falls. Hunters return with a large buck enough meat for many families. Women butcher with skill. Nothing is wasted. Meat dried, hide tanned into leather, bones carved into tools. This is the rhythm of Cherokee life, planting and harvest, hunt and feast, ceremony and birth and death, all woven into one continuous thread. This world has existed for thousands of years. The Cherokee's origin stories begin here. Some scholars suggest distant migration from the Great Lakes, but evidence shows they've lived in these mountains for at least 4,000 years, perhaps far longer. Their language belongs to the Iroquoian family, though it's so distinct from northern relatives it's nearly unrecognizable. By 100 CE, their ancestors built platform mounds and towns. By 1500, nearly 100 autonomous towns flourished, each with its own council house, sacred fire, and dual governance. A white peace government led by a peace chief, and a red war government led by a war chief. This is not a primitive society. It is a civilization complex, ancient, and deeply rooted in its land, and they have no idea what's coming. Far to the east, across an unseen ocean, ships are being built. Men with strange weapons and stranger diseases gather, seeking gold, glory, new worlds to conquer. In Spain, Hernando de Soto prepares an expedition, lured by rumors of cities of gold in the interior. He assembles an army, hundreds of soldiers, horses, war dogs, weapons unknown to the Cherokee. Meanwhile, in the Appalachians, life continues as it has for centuries. Sacred fires burn, women tend fields, children laugh, elders pass down stories. No one in these peaceful towns knows their world is about to shatter. One day, you're working in the fields when a Deer Clan messenger arrives, out of breath, eyes wide with fear. Strangers are coming, he gasps, from the south. Hundreds of them. They ride enormous beasts, bigger than elk, faster than deer. They wear shells that arrows cannot pierce. They carry sticks that make thunder and kill from afar. And they have dogs huge, trained to hunt men. You can't comprehend it. Nothing in your world prepares you for this. Days later, De Soto arrives. He's already ravaged Florida and Georgia, burning villages, enslaving people. He seeks gold, not finding it, but he takes what he can. Corn, captives, lives. The Cherokee fight back, but bows and war clubs are useless against steel, horses, guns, and war dogs. De Soto cuts through their land like a blade, then vanishes. The Cherokee bury their dead, rebuild, and hope it's over. But De Soto left something invisible, deadlier than all his weapons combined. Far to the east, across an unseen ocean, ships are being built. Men with strange weapons and stranger diseases gather, seeking gold, glory, new worlds to conquer. In Spain, Hernando de Soto prepares an expedition, lured by rumors of cities of gold in the interior. He assembles an army, hundreds of soldiers, horses, war dogs, weapons unknown to the Cherokee. Meanwhile, in the Appalachians, life continues as it has for centuries. Sacred fires burn, Women tend fields, children laugh, elders pass down stories. No one in these peaceful towns knows their world is about to shatter. One day you're working in the fields when a deer clan messenger arrives out of breath, eyes wide with fear. Strangers are coming, he gasps. From the south, hundreds of them. They ride enormous beasts, bigger than elk, faster than deer. They wear shells that arrows cannot pierce. They carry sticks that make thunder and kill from afar. And they have dogs, huge, trained to hunt men. You can't comprehend it. Nothing in your world prepares you for this. Days later, DeSoto arrives. He's already ravaged Florida and Georgia, burning villages, enslaving people. He seeks gold, not finding it, but he takes what he can, corn, captives, lives. The Cherokee fight back, but bows and war clubs are useless against steel, horses, guns, and war dogs. DeSoto cuts through their land like a blade, then vanishes. The Cherokee bury their dead, rebuild, and hope it's over. But DeSoto left something, invisible, deadlier than all his weapons combined. Disease, smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus. The Cherokee have no names for these, no immunity. Fevers rise, spots erupt, bodies rot while still breathing. Death comes in days, entire families vanish. Medicine men try everything, ceremonies, herbs, going to water but the river, once healing, now worsens the fever. Nothing works. Villages stand empty. Food sits cold in pots. Dogs wander among corpses. The stench is unforgettable, sweet and rotten. Before contact, perhaps 100,000 Cherokee lived here. After the plagues, maybe 10,000 remain. 90% gone in a generation. The clan system begins to unravel. Clans vanish. Elders die before passing down knowledge. Ceremonies falter. Sacred fires go out. Survivors wander a world that no longer makes sense. If illness comes from spiritual imbalance, what sin could bring this? This is the world. When the English arrive, by the late 1600s, colonists line the coast, hungry for land and deerskins. In Europe, deerskin gloves and bookbindings are luxury goods. The Cherokee, expert hunters, trade skins for guns, metal tools, cloth, and alcohol. At first, it seems beneficial. Guns ease hunting. Metal tools surpass stone. But the balance shifts. Men hunt not for food, but for skins. 50,000 a year to Charleston by 1700. 150,000 by the 1730s. Deer vanish. Hunters clash with other tribes. And then alcohol. The Cherokee have no cultural guardrails against it. Traders exploit this, flooding negotiations with rum, extracting land and loyalty from drunk leaders, creating debt and chaos. Alcoholism spreads, violence rises, families fracture. Cherokee leaders plead with colonists to stop the trade. Their pleas are ignored. The Cherokee become diplomats, playing English, French, and Spanish against each other, survivors in a game they never chose. In 1758, alliance with the British in the French and Indian War turns sour. Cherokee warriors, returning home, rest in Virginia. Settlers murder them for their horses. The Cherokee send a war party to restore balance, blood for blood, as the clans demand. Colonists cry foul. The British demand the warriors surrender. The Cherokee refuse. The Anglo-Cherokee War erupts. For 3 years, British armies march into Cherokee land with one goal: total destruction. They don't just fight warriors, they burn every town they reach. They destroy crops in the fields, slaughter livestock, torch granaries full of winter corn. The Cherokee resist fiercely, using their knowledge of the mountains, ambushing, vanishing, reappearing, but guerrilla tactics. Can't overcome an enemy with endless supplies and no rules of war. By 1761, they surrender. The peace treaty costs them vast tracts of ancestral land, hunting grounds that fed generations, gone, signed away to make the settlers feel safe. That's the pattern now. Fight, lose, surrender, territory. Watch the borders of your world shrink. A little more and the American Revolution looms. That war will split the Cherokee right down the middle. Some will side with the British, hoping a British victory might halt the ceaseless tide of American settlers surging into their lands. Others will try to stay neutral, to wait and see which side wins before committing. And there's a woman. Her name is Nanyehi. The English call her Nancy Ward. She was born in Chota, the sacred mother town, around 1738, the same year a smallpox epidemic claimed half her people. Her mother belonged to the Wolf clan. Her uncle was one of the nation's most powerful chiefs. At 17, Nanyehi fought in a battle against the Creek, crouched behind a log beside her husband, chewing his rifle bullets to make them jagged and deadlier. When he fell, she didn't flee. She seized his rifle and charged. The Cherokee won that day, and Nanyehi was named Gigabilev Woman, the highest honor a Cherokee woman could receive. Now in her 40s, she has seen everything: the epidemics, the wars, the treaties that always cost more land. She married an English trader, learned their language and customs, raised children who lived between two worlds. Now she is about to attempt something dangerous. She will try to make peace in a time when everyone demands war. But that's a story for another stretch of this night. For now, picture yourself in a Cherokee town around 1770. The world your grandparents knew is gone. The population has rebounded somewhat from the worst plagues, but it remains a fraction of what it once was. The old ceremonies continue, yet they feel different. The sacred fires still burn, but in fewer towns. The 7 clans still matter, but their influence has waned. European goods are everywhere. Your clothes are likely made of trade cloth, not deerskin. Your tools are metal, not stone. The gun leaning against your wall is essential for hunting, for defense. You might even keep cattle, having learned from watching settlers. Some Cherokee have adopted European farming, growing cotton and tobacco for sale instead of corn and beans for sustenance. The English language creeps in. Some learn it for trade. A few convert to Christianity under the missionaries now appearing in their towns. The old ways and the new coexists, sometimes blending, sometimes clashing. Your grandmother may remember a time before all this. She might tell stories of the world before the strangers came, before the dying times. She may know songs and ceremonies younger people have never heard. She carries an entire world inside her world, slipping away with each passing year. And beyond the mountains, the colonists grow restless. They tire of British rule. They speak of independence, of building their own nation. When that war comes, the Cherokee will be forced to choose sides, and whatever they choose, they will lose. That's the cruel truth of this chapter. The Cherokee have survived. They've adapted. They've learned new skills, forged new alliances, found ways to endure, in a world determined to erase them. But the ground keeps shifting beneath their feet. Every time they think they've grasped the rules change. Disease returns in waves: smallpox in 1738, again in 1759. Each outbreak kills thousands. Each one shatters fragile recovery. Each one carries away more elders, more knowledge, more memory, and the borders keep shrinking. Every war ends in another treaty. Every treaty surrenders more land. The 40,000 square miles their ancestors once called home has been cut nearly in half, and the cutting isn't finished. Yet, through it all, the Cherokee do not vanish. They bend, they adapt, they change. They keep finding ways to survive. The 7 clans still meet in council houses. Clan mothers still pass identity through the maternal line. Hunters still go to water at dawn, praying to the spirits, honoring the deer they take. Women still plant corn, beans, and squash along the riverbanks. The form shifts, but the essence endures, and soon something new will unfold. A generation is coming of age that will face a choice their ancestors never imagined. Whether to hold fast to the old ways or transform completely. Whether to resist the American civilization pressing in from all sides or adopt it wholesale. A young woman from the Wolf clan will soon make a decision that saves the lives of white settlers. Even as her own people ready for war, she will become a bridge between worlds, speaking for peace when others call for blood. And a boy will be born somewhere in the Tennessee country to a Cherokee mother and possibly a white father. He will grow up with a limp that bars him from warriorhood. Instead, he'll become a silversmith, shaping metal into beauty. And he will spend 12 years of his life trying to capture the sounds of his language on paper, trying to give his people something no outside force can ever take away. The world keeps turning, the story keeps unfolding, and the Cherokee keeps surviving one generation at a time through catastrophe after catastrophe, holding on to who they are, even as everything around them changes. Nanyehi was 17 when she followed her husband into battle. The Cherokee were at war with the Creeka conflict simmering for years over hunting grounds and old grievances. Her husband, Kingfisher, was a warrior of the Deer clan. When his war party set out, Nanyehi went with him. This wasn't unusual. Cherokee women often accompanied war parties to cook, carry supplies, and tend the wounded. But Nanyehi wasn't content to stay in the rear. At Taliwa, near present-day Canton, Georgia, she Krauk. For now, picture yourself in a Cherokee town around 1770. The world your grandparents knew is gone. The population has rebounded somewhat from the worst plagues, but it remains a fraction of what it once was. The old ceremonies continue, yet they feel different. The sacred fires still burn. The 7 clans still matter, but their influence has waned. European goods are everywhere. Your clothes are likely made of trade cloth, not deerskin. Your tools are metal, not stone. The gun leaning against your wall is essential for hunting, for defense. You might even keep cattle, having learned from watching settlers. Some Cherokee have adopted European farming, growing cotton and tobacco for sale instead of corn and beans for sustenance. The English language creeps in. Some learn it for trade. A few convert to Christianity, under the missionaries, now appearing in their towns. The old ways and the new coexists, sometimes blending, sometimes clashing. Your grandmother may remember a time before all this. She might tell stories of the world before the strangers came, before the dying times. She may know songs and ceremonies younger people have never heard. She carries an entire world inside her world, slipping away with each passing year. And beyond the mountains, the colonists grow restless. They tire of British rule. They speak of independence, of building their own nation. When that war comes, the Cherokee will be forced to choose sides, and whatever they choose, they will lose. That's the cruel truth of this chapter. The Cherokee have survived. They've adapted. They've learned new skills, forged new alliances, found ways to endure in a world determined to erase them. But the ground keeps shifting beneath their feet. Every time they think they've grasped the rules change. Disease returns in waves, smallpox in 1738, again in 1759. Each outbreak kills thousands. Each one shatters fragile recovery. Each one carries away more elders, more knowledge, more memory, and the borders keep shrinking. Every war ends in another treaty. Every treaty surrenders more land. The 40,000 square miles their ancestors once called home has been cut nearly in half, and the cutting isn't finished. Yet, through it all, the Cherokee do not vanish. They bend, they adapt, they change. They keep finding ways to survive. The 7 clans still meet in council houses. Clan mothers still pass identity through the maternal line. Hunters still go to water at dawn, praying to the spirits, honoring the deer they take. Women still plant corn, beans, and squash along the riverbanks. The form shifts, but the essence endures, and soon something new will unfold. A generation is coming of age that will face a choice their ancestors never imagined. Whether to hold fast to the old ways or transform completely. Whether to resist the American civilization pressing in from all sides or adopt it wholesale. A young woman from the Wolf clan will soon make a decision that saves the lives of white settlers. Even as her own people, ready for war, she will become a bridge between worlds, speaking for peace when others call for blood. And a boy will be born somewhere in the Tennessee country to a Cherokee mother and possibly a white father. He will grow up with a limp that bars him from warriorhood. Instead, he'll become a silversmith, shaping metal into beauty. And he will spend 12 years of his life trying to capture the sounds of his language on paper, trying to give his people something no outside force can ever take away. The world keeps turning. The story keeps unfolding. And the Cherokee keeps surviving one generation at a time through catastrophe after catastrophe, holding on to who they are, even as everything around them changes. Nanyehi was 17 when she followed her husband into battle. The Cherokee were at war with the Creeka, conflict simmering for years over hunting grounds and old grievances. Her husband, Kingfisher, was a warrior of the Deer clan. When his war party set out, Nanyehi went with him. This wasn't unusual. Cherokee women often accompanied war parties to cook, carry supplies, and tend the wounded. But Nanyehi wasn't content to stay in the rear. At Taliwa, near present-day Canton, Georgia, she crouched behind a fallen log, beside her husband, helping him reload. Early rifles were slow powder poured, ball rammed, pan primed all, while bullets flew. any advantage mattered. So she chewed his lead bullets with her teeth, making them jagged. A smooth ball might pass clean through a man. A chewed, one tear's flesh. The battle raged for hours. Smoke, screams, chaos. Then Kingfisher fell, shot dead beside her. Most would have fled or collapsed. Nanyehi did neither. She seized his rifle, stood, and charged. The Cherokee warriors, seeing her sprint toward the enemy, screaming and firing, surged behind her. The creek line broke. The battle was won. Afterward, the clan mothers convened. They spoke of her courage, how she turned the tide, how she shamed seasoned warriors and bestowed upon her the title, Gigo, beloved woman. This wasn't mere honor, it was power. As beloved woman, she gained a vote in the General Council, led the Women's Council, and held absolute authority over prisoners of war, life or death, by her word alone. The Cherokee believed the Great Spirit sometimes spoke through her. She was 17 over the next 2 decades. Nanyehi became one of the most influential figures in Cherokee politics. She remarried this time to an English trader named Bryant. Ward learned English, adopted European customs, and raised bicultural children. She began using the name Nancy Ward, the version the English could pronounce, but she never ceased being Cherokee. She never forgot the source of her power or her duty to her people. By 1776, Nancy Ward was in her late 30s. The American Revolution had begun, and the Cherokee faced a fateful choice. The British arrived first, offering gifts and promises. Help defeat the rebels, and will protect your lands, enforce boundaries, stop settler encroachment. It was a compelling argument. The settlers were the ones ignoring treaties, seizing hunting grounds, provoking conflict. But Nancy Ward wasn't convinced. She'd seen too many wars. She knew the pattern. Cherokee might win battles, but they always lost the war end with it. More land, more lives, more suffering. Her cousin, Dragging Canoe, felt differently. A warrior through and through, tall, fierce. Scarred from battle, he'd watched his people lose everything piece by piece until something in him hardened into iron. At a council meeting in 1776, as elders urged caution, Dragging Canoe rose. Firelight flickered across his face as he addressed the assembly. Where are the Delawares now? The Pequots, the Narragansetts, the Mohicans, the Packanack? They have vanished before the greed of the white man, like snow before a summer sun. Will we share their fate? Silence filled the council house. We are not yet conquered, he declared. We have not lost everything. But if we do not fight now, we will lose it all. The settlers are locusts. They will eat everything until nothing remains. An elder warned that war would bring only ruin. The colonists were too numerous, too well armed. Dragging Canoe's reply became legend. He pointed to the lands already ceded. We had a country where the bones of our ancestors lie buried. I have no land to lose. I will fight until I have no more blood to spill. The council remained divided, but Dragging Canoe didn't need permission. He announced plans to attack settlements along the Watauga River and asked Nancy Ward, as beloved woman, to prepare the black drinka, sacred tea warriors consumed before battle. She brewed it. But she also did something else. 3 white tradesmen she knew, men she'd traded with for years, were staying in her town. She released them. She told them of Dragging Canoe's plans. Go, she said, warn the settlers. Get their women and children to safety. they rode hard. They reached the Watauga settlements just in time. Families fled to a fort. When dragging canoes warriors struck, they found defenses, not sleeping victims. The attack failed. Dragging Canoe was gravely wounded, and when settlers learned who had warned them, Nancy Ward became a hero to the colonist sand, a traitor to some of her own people. But she wasn't done. After the raid, Cherokee warriors captured a white woman named Lydia Bean, wife of a settler. They tied her to a stake, piled wood at her feet, and lit the fire. Then Nancy Ward arrived. As beloved woman, she held absolute power over prisoners. She walked through the crowd of warriors to the burning pyre and commanded them to stop. She ordered Lydia Bean cut down. No one argued. She took Lydia into her home, nursed her back to health, and in those weeks they taught each other. Lydia showed Nancy how to make butter and cheese, how to tend dairy cattle, skills unknown to the Cherokee. Nancy Ward would later introduce dairy farming to her people. In return, she taught Lydia about clans, ceremonies, and what it meant to belong to a nation rooted in these mountains for millennia. When Lydia recovered, Nancy Ward sent her home to the very settlements now preparing to retaliate. And retaliate they did. That fall, colonial militias from Virginia, North and South Carolina invaded Cherokee territory. They burned over 50 towns, destroyed crops and livestock, killed resistors and non-combatants alike. But when they reached Chota, the sacred mother town where Nancy Ward lived, they stopped. They did not burn it. Some say it was gratitude. Others say they knew better than to destroy the home of the beloved woman. Either way, Chota survived. Nancy Ward kept trying. Year after year, she spoke for peace. She attended treaty negotiations, astonishing American officials who'd never seen a woman in diplomacy. At one meeting, when John Sevier expressed surprise at her presence, she replied plainly, "You think women are..." They rode hard. They reached the Watauga settlements just in time. Families fled to a fort. When dragging canoes warriors struck, they found defenses, not sleeping victims. The attack failed. Dragging Canoe was gravely wounded, and when settlers learned who had warned them, Nancy Ward became a hero to the colonist sand, a traitor to some of her own people. But she wasn't done. After the raid, Cherokee warriors captured a white woman named Lydia Bean, wife of a settler. They tied her to a stake, piled wood at her feet, and lit the fire. Then Nancy Ward arrived. As beloved woman, she held absolute power over prisoners. She walked through the crowd of warriors to the burning pyre and commanded them to stop. She ordered Lydia Bean cut down. No one argued. She took Lydia into her home, nursed her back to health, and in those weeks they taught each other. Lydia showed Nancy how to make butter and cheese, how to tend dairy cattle, skills unknown to the Cherokee. Nancy Ward would later introduce dairy farming to her people. In return, she taught Lydia about clans, ceremonies, and what it meant to belong to a nation rooted in these mountains for millennia. When Lydia recovered, Nancy Ward sent her home to the very settlements now preparing to retaliate. And retaliate they did. That fall, colonial militias from Virginia, North and South Carolina invaded Cherokee territory. They burned over 50 towns, destroyed crops and livestock, killed resistors and non-combatants alike. But when they reached Chota, the sacred mother town where Nancy Ward lived, they stopped. They did not burn it. Some say it was gratitude. Others say they knew better than to destroy the home of the beloved woman. Either way, Chota survived. Nancy Ward kept trying. Year after year, she spoke for peace. She attended treaty negotiations, astonishing American officials who'd never seen a woman in diplomacy. At one meeting, when John Sevier expressed surprise at her presence, she replied plainly, "You think women are nothing, but we are your mothers. You are our sons. Our cry is all for peace. Let it continue." The Americans didn't know what to make of her. In their world, women stayed home. They didn't speak in councils. They certainly didn't hold power over life and death. Yet they respected her. Thomas Jefferson himself wrote that her wishes should be honored. Meanwhile, Dragging Canoe refused to yield. When the main Cherokee body made peace, he led his followers south to the Chickamauga Creek area. They became the Chickamauga Cherokee, waging guerrilla war against American expansion for 20 more years. Dragging Canoe died in 1792, still fighting. His last words, legend says, were a warning. "The whole nation sits in darkness. I can do nothing more. You must carry on." Nancy Ward lived until 1822. She watched the Cherokee world she knew transform beyond recognition. She saw her people adopt European farming, clothing, religion. She saw them write a constitution, publish a newspaper, do everything the Americans demanded. And she watched it not be enough. In 1817, near 82, frail, to attend council, she sent a message read aloud by her son. "Our beloved children and headmen of the Cherokee Nation, we raised you on this land. Once our country was vast, but through repeated sales, it is now a small tract. Your mothers, your sisters, beg you, do not part with any more of our land." 12 other women, including her daughter and granddaughter, signed the plea, the backbone of Cherokee society, making one last stand. The council listened politely, then sold more land anyway. The world had changed. Cherokee society had grown, more patriarchal, mirroring the Americans they sought to appease. The beloved woman held less power, the Women's Council less authority. Nancy Ward died in 1822, running an inn on the Ocoee River, caring for orphans, watching the final collapse draw near. But while she fought for peace, while Dragging Canoe waged endless war, while the Cherokee lost battle after battle and treaty after treaty, something else was happening. A boy was growing up in the Tennessee country. His name was Sequoyah. His mother was of the Paint clan. His father may have been a white trader named Nathaniel Gestor, someone else entirely. No one is certain. What everyone remembers is that Sequoyah walked with a limpsome childhood illness or injury left, one leg shorter than the other. He couldn't run fast enough to be a messenger. He couldn't fight well enough to be a warrior, so he found other paths. He learned silversmithing, crafting jewelry and ornaments sold to Cherokee and white traders alike. He made enough to support himself. But Sequoyah was always watching. He noticed how white traders made marks on paper that carried messages across great distances. The Cherokee called it talking leaves. Sequoyah became obsessed. In 1809, he began working on something, a way for the Cherokee to talk on paper, a way to capture their language in visible form that anyone could read. His neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. His wife believed he practiced witchcraft. But Sequoyah kept working. 12 years, he labored 12 years of failure, frustration, and restarting from scratch. 12 years of ridicule, of people burning his notes, calling him mad, and then, in 1821, he finished. But that's its own story, a story about a man who gave his people something that could never be taken away. A story about refusing to quit, even when the whole world calls you insane right now. As you lie in your comfortable bed, consider what the Cherokee had endured by this point. 2.5 centuries of contact, diseases that wiped out 90% of their population, wars with Spaniards, English, and Americans, land surrendered treaty after treaty after treaty, and still they remained, still fighting, still adapting, still Cherokee. Nancy Ward tried peace. Dragging Canoe tried war. Neither stopped the tide. But maybe there was another way. Maybe if the Cherokee could prove they were as civilized as the Americans, if they could read, write, govern themselves, build farms and businesses, maybe then they'd be left in peace. That was the hope, anyway. It would be tested in the years ahead, tested to destruction. Picture a man alone in a cabin, scratching marks onto bark. It's 1809. His name is Sequoia. He's about 40, though no one knows his exact birth year. He has a wife, children, a farm that needs tending, a silversmith trade that pays the bills, and he's ignoring it all. For months, he's been consumed by something he can't fully explain. He's watched white traders perform what seems like magic, make marks on paper, send it far away, and have the recipient understand the message perfectly. Talking leaves, the Cherokee call it, but Sequoia doesn't believe it's magic. He believes it's a system, a code that turns spoken sounds into visible symbols. If white people can do it, why not the Cherokee? His neighbors think he's lost his mind. You must understand who Sequoia was before this obsession. Born in the 1770s in a Tennessee village. His mother was Wooty of the Paint Clan. His father's identity remains unclear, perhaps Nathaniel Gist, perhaps a Cherokee man. Sequoia never spoke of it. What everyone agreed on, he walked with a limp. One leg, shortened by illness or injury, kept him from messenger duty or warriorhood. In a society that valued speed, strength, and battlefield courage, he started at a disadvantage, so he found other ways to matter. He discovered a gift for working metal, shaping silver into jewelry, trade goods, beautiful things. He became a respected craftsman. He also learned blacksmithing, making his own tools, solving problems through ingenuity rather than force. He developed a habit of studying how things worked. That habit would change history. Sequoia never learned to read or write English or any written language. By European standards, he was illiterate. But that didn't mean he was unintelligent. It meant he approached writing with fresh eyes. He studied English books he couldn't read, observing repeated marks and patterns. He watched traders write with quills, fold letters, send them offhand, saw others read them and understand. It had to be a system. If he could crack it, he could build one for Cherokee. In 1809, he began. His first idea seemed logical. Create a unique symbol for every word. But Cherokee has tens of thousands of words. After months, he had hundreds of symbols and was nowhere near complete. Worse, no one could memorize them, not even him. He scrapped it all and started over. Next, he tried an alphabet like the English 26 letters combined to spell words. But Cherokee isn't English. It's polysynthetic. Single words carry the meaning of whole sentences. Forcing it into an English-style alphabet was like pouring water into a basket. It leaked everywhere. More months, more failure, more restarting. His wife, Sally Waters, watched her husband vanish into obsession. The farm went untended. Silversmith orders piled up. Sequoia spent every spare moment scratching marks onto scraps of bark, parchment, anything he could find, searching for a way to give his people a voice that would last forever. Bark, muttering to himself, trying combinations. That never quite worked. She thought he'd gone crazy. Honestly, sometimes he wondered the same thing. The neighbors talked of course they did. That lame man, the silversmith, have you seen what he's doing? Sitting there, making marks all day. Thinks he can turn the Cherokee language into talking. Leaves? Who does he think he is? Some thought it was worse than madness. They called it witchcraft, making marks that carried thoughts. That sounded like dark medicine, bad spirits, the kind of thing that brought trouble to everyone nearby. One night, Sally had had enough. She'd watched her husband vanish into obsession for years. The children needed care. The farm was failing. Other men provided for their families. Hers sat in a corner, scratching bark like a child lost in preet. One night, Sally had had enough. She'd watched her husband vanish into obsession for years. The children needed care. The farm was failing. Other men provided for their families. Hers sat in a corner, scratching bark like a child lost in pretend. Gathered all of Sequoia's work years of it. Thousands of symbols etched on bark, paper, leather, anything he could find. Stacks, piles, the accumulated labor of a decade-long fixation. She carried it all outside and burned it. The neighbors likely saw the flames and nodded to themselves. Good. Maybe now that madman will come to his senses. Maybe he'll finally be a proper husband and father again. When Sequoia came home and saw what she'd done, he just stood there, watching the ashes cool in the evening air, watching years of his life drift away as smoke and cinder. The symbols he'd spent so long refining, the progress, the failed experiments, and promising breakthroughs, all gone. His wife stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting for him to rage or weep, or finally admit she'd been right all along, that this talking leaves nonsense was exactly that, nonsense. Sequoia said nothing. He stayed until the fire died completely, until only gray ash and a few charred fragments remained. Then he went back inside and started over, not truly from scratch. He'd learned from his failures. That knowledge lived in his mind now, burned into memory, just as surely as his notes had burned in the yard. He knew a symbol for every word was impossible. He knew an English-style alphabet wouldn't work for Cherokee. There had to be another way, he began, listening differently, really listening to the sounds of his language, not the words themselves, but the building blocks beneath them. And he realized something vital. Cherokee didn't have that many distinct sounds, not compared to its vast vocabulary. The same syllables recurred, woven into countless words. They weren't isolated letters, like in English. They were spoken chunks. What if he made a symbol for each syllable instead of each word? He began counting, cataloging every distinct syllable in the language. It took months, but when he finished, he had a manageable number, 85, maybe 86. That was it. The entire Cherokee language was built from fewer than 100 syllables. A person could memorize 85 symbols. A child could learn them. Now he needed to design the symbols themselves. Years earlier, a missionary had given him an English spelling book. Sequoia couldn't read it, but he admired the shapes of the letters. He began borrowing them, not copying the alphabet, but repurposing its forms. The letter D became a symbol for one Cherokee sound. The letter R transformed into something entirely new. He invented some symbols from nothing. He modified others. Slowly, he built a system where each symbol represented one Cherokee syllable. To write any word, you simply strung together the symbols for its syllables. To read it, you sounded out the syllables in order. It was elegant, logical, and it was something no human being had ever done before. Other writing systems had emerged over centuries, shaped by generations of scribes. Sequoia invented a complete, functional writing system, alone illiterate in every language, with no formal training, over roughly 12 years. By 1821, he was ready. The problem? No one believed him. Cherokee leaders had heard rumors about his project, about witchcraft. When he claimed he could teach any Cherokee to read and write in weeks, they were deeply skeptical. One chief reportedly laughed aloud. 12 years of work, and you expect us to believe you've done what no Cherokee has ever done? You can't even read English. How could you invent writing? But Sequoia had prepared for this. He had a secret weapon. His daughter, Aoka. She was about 6 years old, and she could read. For months, he'd quietly taught her the syllabary. She'd absorbed it quickly, as children do. She could look at any combination of symbols and speak the words they represented. She could hear any Cherokee word and write it down flawlessly. To her, it was as natural as speaking. At a council meeting in New Echota, Sequoia proposed a test. He would leave the room. The chiefs could say anything they wanted, and Aoka would write it down. Then he'd return, read her marks, and repeat their exact words. The chiefs exchanged glances, some amused, some suspicious, but agreed. This should be interesting, one said. If the old silversmith is running a trick, we'll catch him. Sequoia walked out. The door closed. Inside, the chiefs huddled, whispering. They needed something he couldn't possibly guess, something that would prove this wasn't memorization or trickery. They settled on a message. One chief spoke it. Little Aoka listened intently, face serious and focused. Then she picked up a piece of paper and began scratching symbols with a steady hand. When she finished, they called Sequoia back. He walked to his daughter, picked up the paper. The room fell silent. Every chief watched. Years of work, thousands of symbols burned, a reputation as a madman. It all came down to this moment. Sequoia looked at the marks and read their words back perfectly. Silence stretched. Then a chief said, "Try again." They did. Longer messages, complex ideas, secret details only those in the room would know, names of distant places Sequoia had never visited, events he hadn't witnessed. Each time, Aoka wrote it down. Each time, her father read it back exactly right. By the 4th or 5th test, skepticism had turned to something else, wonder, perhaps, or awe. This was real. It worked. It wasn't magic or witchcraft. It was a system, a tool any Cherokee could learn. The council voted to adopt the syllabary. Officially, they would teach it to everyone. They would make the Cherokee a literate people. What followed was unlike anything in human history. Within months, Cherokee across the nation were learning to read and write, not in English, which required years of missionary schooling, but in their own language, often in days or even hours. The syllabary was so intuitive, so perfectly matched to Cherokee speech, that fluency came almost instantly to anyone who spoke the language. White missionaries who had spent decades trying to teach English literacy watched in disbelief as the same people became fluent readers and writers of Cherokee in weeks. One missionary wrote that the Cherokee were learning faster than he could keep track. Parents taught children by evening fires. Children taught grandparents who thought themselves too old for new things. Hunters left notes on trees about game trails, meeting points. Young men sent love letters to distant towns. Merchants recorded trades and debts. Healers wrote down medicine formulas once held only in memory. The syllabary spread like fire through dry grass town to town, family to family. People who had never held a pen were suddenly writing letters, recording thoughts, leaving messages for the future. Within 5 years, the Cherokee had a higher literacy rate than the white settlers surrounding them. Pause and consider that. A people who had relied on oral tradition for thousands of years became one of the most literate populations in North America almost overnight, and in their own language, the language of ancestors, ceremonies, clan mothers, and sacred stories. Now they could write down laws, history, songs. They could communicate across vast distances without relying on fallible messengers. They could preserve knowledge for generations in a way memory alone never could. Sequoia had given them something that couldn't be taken away, something that belonged entirely to them. He became famous not just among the Cherokee, but among white Americans too, who couldn't fathom how an illiterate man had invented a writing system. The Cherokee government awarded him a silver medal and a lifetime pension. His face would later appear on stamps and statues. Schools would bear his name. Even the giant redwood trees of California would be named for him, though he never saw them. But Sequoia wasn't finished. In his later years, he traveled west, seeking Cherokee groups who had migrated generations earlier, hoping to share the syllabary with them too. He wanted every Cherokee everywhere to have this gift. He died in Mexico in 1843, still searching. The syllabary he created is still used today. Cherokee children learn it in schools. Signs in Oklahoma and North Carolina display it proudly. The talking leaves Sequoia spent 12 years crafting are still speaking nearly 2 centuries later. And here's what makes it ache. Sequoia gave his people a weapon, a tool for survival, proof they were as civilized, as capable, as fully human as anyone else. The Cherokee used it to build a republic. They wrote a constitution, published a newspaper, adopted schools, churches, farms, businesses, everything. Americans said they needed to be treated as equals. And it still wasn't enough, but that's the next part of the story. For now, lying in your warm bed, just think of that man in his cabin scratching marks on bark, watching his wife burn everything he'd made, and starting again anyway. 12 years of failure, ridicule, and doubt until, finally, success. Sometimes the impossible just takes a little longer. On February 21st, 1828, something unprecedented happened in North America. A newspaper rolled off the press. Newspapers weren't new, but this one was. Half was in English. The other half was in Cherokee. The Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper. the first bilingual paper in the United States. Its masthead carried a motto in both languages. In English, "I will arise." In Cherokee, the same words in Sequoia's syllabaria, declaration, and a promise. "We are here. We are rising. We will not disappear." Its editor was a young man named Elias Boudinot, born Buckwaddy, a full-blood Cherokee from an influential family. He'd been sent as a teen to a missionary school in Connecticut. On February 21, 1828, something unprecedented happened in North America. A newspaper rolled off the press. Newspapers weren't new, but this one was. Half was in English. The other half was in Cherokee, the Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper, the first bilingual paper in the United States. Its masthead carried a motto in both languages. In English, "I will arise." In Cherokee, the same words in Sequoia's syllabaria, declaration, and a promise. "We are here. We are rising. We will not disappear." Its editor was a young man named Elias Boudinot, born Buckwaddy, a full-blood Cherokee from an influential family. He'd been sent as a teen to a missionary school in Connecticut, where he converted to Christianity and adopted the name of his wealthy benefactor. Educated, articulate, and deeply committed to his people, Boudinot understood a crucial truth. The Cherokee weren't just fighting for land anymore. They were fighting for perception, for legitimacy, for the right to exist as a nation. Americans kept repeating the same claim. Indians are savages. They can't govern themselves. They have no written language, no laws, no proper government. They're obstacles to progress. The only solution is to move them out of the way. Boudinot and other Cherokee leaders decided to prove them wrong. The Cherokee Phoenix became their weapon. Each week, it published tribal news, reprinted American and international articles, and most importantly, documented everything the Cherokee were doing to demonstrate their civilization. "Look, the paper said we have a written language, schools, farms, businesses, churches, a constitutional government. We are not what you say we are." The paper reached far beyond Cherokee borders. Sympathetic Northerners subscribed. U.S. officials in Washington received copies. For the first time, the Cherokee had a voice that could speak to the entire nation. But a newspaper needs a nation to write about. And by 1827, the Cherokee had built one. The man most responsible was John Rawson, unlikely leader. His father was a Scottish trader. His mother, part Cherokee and part Scottish. By blood, Ross was only 1/8 Cherokee. He looked white, dressed like a white man, spoke English as his first language. But Cherokee identity wasn't measured by blood, came through the mother's clan. Ross's mother belonged to the Bird clan that made him Cherokee, period. He'd grown up straddling two worlds. His father ensured he received an English education, writing, business, treaties. But he also learned the old ways, ceremonies, responsibilities, what it meant to belong to a people. During the War of 1812, Ross served as a lieutenant under Andrew Jackson, fighting the Creek at Horseshoe Bend. Jackson respected him. They shook hands after the victory. Ross would remember that handshake years later when Jackson became his people's greatest enemy. By the 1820s, Ross was the Cherokee Nation's most powerful political figures, smart, patient, and fluent in American law and politics. He was utterly committed to one idea. The Cherokee would survive by becoming undeniably civilized. In July 1827, delegates from across the nation gathered at New Ikata for a constitutional convention. Think about that. A people who had governed through clan councils for millennia were now drafting a written constitution modeled on the United States itself. Debates lasted weeks. Traditionalists opposed it. This isn't the Cherokee way. But most understood the stakes. If the Cherokee wanted recognition as a nation, they had to look like one, at least by American standards. The resulting constitution was remarkable. It established 3 branches of government: an executive with a principal chief elected by popular vote, a bicameral legislature, national committee, and national council, and a judiciary, Supreme Court, and district courts. It included a Bill of Rights, freedom of religion, speech, fair trial, protection from unreasonable searches principles the Cherokee had always honored. Now codified in terms Americans would understand, it declared the Cherokee Nation sovereign. Land belonged collectively to the people. No individual could sell it to outsiders. No state held authority within Cherokee borders. John Ross was elected principal chief under the new Constitution. He would hold that office for nearly 40 years through everything that followed. Ross had built a comfortable life, a plantation, a ferry business, a home called Rose Cottage, a wife named Quatia, full-blood Cherokee, and 5 children. By any measure, he was successful. With his fair skin and English education, he could have walked into white society, taken his wealth, and left the Cherokee behind. Some mixed ancestry people did exactly that. Ross never considered it, not for a moment. The Cherokee had done it. They'd built a republic. They had a written language, a newspaper, a constitution, elected leaders, schools, churches, farms. They'd adopted Christianity, American-style clothing, American-style government, wealthy Cherokee, even enslaved black people, because that's what wealthy Southerners did by any reasonable standard. They were a civilized nation, and it didn't matter at all, because in the summer of 1828, a white man named Benjamin Parks was walking through Cherokee territory near Dahlonega. He kicked a rock, picked it up, panned, saw gold. Word spread fast. Within months, thousands of prospectors flooded Cherokee land, Georgia, the Carolinas, everywhere. They set up camps, dug mines, panned streams, took what they wanted, dared anyone to stop them. This was the Georgia Gold Rush, the first major gold rush in American history. 20 years before California, the Cherokee tried to enforce their laws. This was their land. The miners were trespassing. But how do you stop thousands of men consumed by gold fever? How do you enforce laws when those breaking them don't recognize your authority? Georgia struck. The state legislature passed laws designed to dismantle the Cherokee Nation from within. Cherokee government was declared null and void. Cherokee courts lost all power. All Cherokee people were now subject to Georgia law. Worse, Cherokee were forbidden to testify in court against white people. If a white man robbed, assaulted, or murdered your family, you had no voice. Your word meant nothing. Cherokee were banned from mining gold on their own land. The gold now belonged to Georgia. Council meetings were outlawed. The government they'd just built was now illegal. It became a crime punishable by prison for anyone, white or Cherokee, to encourage resistance to removal. To enforce these laws, Georgia created the Georgia Garda state militia that acted like an occupying army. They rode through Cherokee territory, breaking into homes at night, dragging families from beds. They seized property, claiming it for the state. They arrested leaders on false charges, held them for weeks without trial. They beat resistors, destroyed crops, drove off livestock. They operated with total impunity. One guardsman reportedly bragged he could kill a Cherokee man and face no consequences. He was likely right. Cherokee families began sleeping in the woods, afraid to stay in their own homes. Children went hungry, fathers jailed, simply for being Cherokee on Cherokee land. Women defended homesteads alone against armed men backed by the state. This wasn't law enforcement. It was ethnic cleansing with paperwork. The Cherokee Phoenix documented it. Every outrage, every broken treaty, every violation, wrote editorial after editorial, appealing to America's conscience. Surely, once Americans see what's being done in their name, they'll stop it. The paper printed letters from Cherokee citizens, reprinted Northern condemnations, published every treaty the U.S. had signed and broken. For a while, it seemed to work. Subscriptions poured in. Northern religious groups raised funds. Politicians cited the Phoenix in Congress. Public opinion, in some places, shifted. But Georgia didn't care about public opinion, and America's conscience proved weaker than Bodine hoped, because in 1829, Andrew Jackson became president. Jackson had fought alongside Cherokee warriors, including John Ross. He'd witnessed the birth of their republic. But he never saw native peoples as equals, only as obstacles. Children who didn't know what was best. He believed the kindest thing was to move them west of the Mississippi, away from white civilization, where they could live in peace until they faded away in 1830 with Jackson's full support. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. It authorized the president to negotiate treaties exchanging native eastern lands for territory west of the Mississippi. The word negotiate suggested consent, but there was none. The congressional debate was fierce. Northerners called it unjust, a violation of treaties, a stain on national honor. Davy Crockett of Tennessee, the famed frontiersman, against it, knowing it would end his career. The bill passed the House by just 5 votes, one of the closest in history. John Ross refused to accept it. He gathered petitions, nearly 16,000 Cherokee signatures, almost the entire population. He took them to Washington, met with anyone who'd listen, argued that the Cherokee were a sovereign nation, that their treaties were the supreme law of the land, that Georgia's actions were illegal. Then he chose the one battlefield where the Cherokee might still win: the courts. He hired the best lawyers available: William Wirt, former U.S. Attorney Generalman who knew constitutional law, who could argue before the Supreme Court. In 1831, the Cherokee Nation's legal fight began. The case, Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, reached the highest court in the land. The Cherokee asked the court to halt Georgia's persecution. They argued they were a foreign nation, that Georgia had no authority over them, and that existing treaties must be honored. Chief Justice John Marshall delivered the opinion, a complex Fr. Chief Justice John Marshall delivered the opinion, complex, frustrating ruling. The court declared the Cherokee were not a foreign nation in the constitutional sense. Instead, they were a domestic dependent nation, like a ward to its guardian. What did that mean? Legally, the court lacked jurisdiction to rule on the case as it had been presented. But Marshall hinted at something deeper. He seemed sympathetic, suggesting that if the right case came along framed properly, the court might rule in the Cherokees' favor. John Ross and his lawyers went searching for that case. They found it in a white missionary named Samuel Worcester. Worcester was a Christian minister living in Cherokee territory, running a mission and a school. Georgia ordered all white residents in Cherokee lands to sign a loyalty oath to the state and obtain a permit. Worcester refused. He believed Georgia had no authority to make such demands. Georgia arrested him, tried him, and sentenced him to 4 years of hard labor. Perfect, Ross thought. Now, the case wasn't about whether the Cherokee could sue in federal court. It was about whether Georgia could imprison an American citizen simply for living on Cherokee land. Question the Supreme Court had to answer. In 1832, Worcester v. Georgia came before Chief Justice Marshall. His opinion was everything the Cherokee had hoped for. Georgia's laws were unconstitutional, he declared. The Cherokee Nation was a distinct political community. Georgia's laws held no force within its borders. Worcester must be freed. For one brief, shining moment, it seemed justice might prevail. Then Andrew Jackson made his position clear. The president reportedly said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." Historians debate whether he spoke those exact words, but his actions left no doubt. The federal government would not enforce the Supreme Court's ruling. Georgia could do whatever it wanted. The Cherokee had won in court hand, lost in reality. The Georgia Guard kept riding. Gold miners kept digging. Pressure kept mounting. And the Cherokee Phoenix kept publishing, week after week, documenting the slow-motion destruction of a nation that had done everything right, everything Americans had demanded, everything that was supposed to prove they deserved equal treatment. None of it mattered, because, in the end, it was never about civilization. It was never about whether the Cherokee could govern themselves, write their language, or worship the right God. It was about land. It was about gold. It was about power. And the Cherokee had something powerful men wanted. That's the truth of this part of the story. The Cherokee didn't fail. They didn't lose because they weren't smart, civilized, or Christian enough. They lost because those who coveted their land didn't care about any of that. The Cherokee Renaissance wasn't a failure. It was proof. Proof that, given the chance, any people can build a nation. Proof that intelligence and capability aren't bound by race or culture. Proof that the arguments used to justify removal were always lies. The Cherokee proved everything they set out to prove, and it still wasn't enough, because some forces can't be stopped by logic, law, or appeals to conscience. Some forces understand only one language. The storm was coming, and nothing the Cherokee had built could stop it. The Cherokee Nation was tearing itself apart. After the Supreme Court victory that changed nothing, after Jackson's refusal to uphold the law, after years of Georgia Guard raids, gold miners, and broken promises, some Cherokee began to doubt John Ross's leadership. Was he leading them off a cliff? One of those doubters was Major Ridge. Major Ridge was everything Ross wasn't. A full-blooded Cherokee warrior who earned his name through blood. He killed his first enemy at 17. He'd fought in more battles than he could count. During the Creek War, he served as a major under Andrew Jackson's, like Ross, but with a war club in hand, not a pen. Now, in his 60s, Ridge had spent his life defending his people. He'd helped build the Cherokee Renaissance, supporting the Constitution, schools, farms. He believed in what they'd created. but he also knew how to read a battlefield. And everything he saw told him this was a war they couldn't win. The miners weren't leaving. The Georgia Guard wasn't stopping. The federal government wasn't helping. Every day, more Cherokee families lost homes, livestock, dignity. The situation worsened relentlessly. Ridge began quiet conversations with his son, John Ridge, educated at a missionary school in Connecticut, with his nephew, Elias Boudinot, editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, with other influential Cherokee who shared his growing despair. John Ridge was his father's opposite in many ways. Where Major Ridge was a warrior, John was a diplomat, refined, educated, married to a white woman from Connecticut, Sarah Bird Northrop. Their union had caused a scandal, nearly sparked a riot, but John persisted, believing in bridging cultures. Now he began to wonder if those bridges led nowhere. What if Ross is wrong? He asked. What if fighting only prolongs the inevitable? What if negotiating the best possible terms and moving west while we still have something to bargain with is the only way to save our people? It was treason, Cherokee. Law made it clear. Selling tribal land without the consent of the nation was punishable by death. Ridge himself had helped write that land, enforced it. Years earlier, he'd taken part in executing a Cherokee man named Doublehead for secretly selling land to Americans. Ridge knew exactly what he risked. He did it anyway, believing he was trying to save his people. John Ridge made the argument most plainly. Look at what's happening. Every year we stay, we lose more land, lives, who we are. The Americans will never let us keep this territory. The only question is whether we leave on our terms or theirs. If we negotiate now, we can get money, good land in the West, and move as a nation with our government and institutions intact. If we wait until they force us out, we'll get nothing. We'll be scattered. We'll be destroyed. Elias Boudinot was torn. He'd spent years using the Cherokee Phoenix to fight for the right to stay, but Georgia Guard seized the printing press in 1834, carting away his life's work. He began to wonder if all that resistance had accomplished anything at all. Ross refused even to consider removal. As long as he was principal chief, he would never sign a treaty surrendering Cherokee land. Never. The Cherokee had lived in these mountains for thousands of years. They'd won in the Supreme Court. The law was on their side. To give up now would be to admit that law and justice meant nothing. The two factions hardened. Ross and his supporters, the vast majority of the Cherokee, became known as the National Party. Ridge, his son, Boudinot, and their allies formed the Treaty Party. Old friends stopped speaking. Families split. Council meetings, once a source of unity, became battlegrounds of accusation and bitterness. Boudinot resigned from the Cherokee Phoenix before its seizure, unable to advocate for a cause he no longer believed in. Ross appointed a new editor who would toe the party line. The two men who had once built a nation side by side now stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. The American government watched with interest. They'd tried for years to secure a removal treaty. Ross wouldn't negotiate, but perhaps the Treaty Party would. In 1835, federal commissioners arrived not to meet with Ross, but with Major Ridge. The negotiations happened in secret. Ridge knew Ross would do everything to stop them, so they met away from the capital, away from the consular handful of men deciding the fate of an entire nation. On December 29, 1835, in the town of New Ikuta, a treaty was signed. The Treaty of New Ikuta surrendered all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi River, every mountain where ancestors were buried, the sacred town of Chota, the fields their mothers had farmed. In exchange, the Cherokee would receive $5 million and new land in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. They'd have 2 years to prepare. After that, they'd be removed by force. The treaty was signed by Major Ridge, John Ridge, Elias Boudinette, and about 100 others, fewer than 500, out of a nation of 16,000, most of them family and close associates. Major Ridge knew exactly what he was doing. As he signed, he reportedly said, "I have signed my death warrant." He wasn't being dramatic. He was being accurate. When Ross learned what had happened, he was furious. This wasn't a treaty, it was fraud. A tiny minority had sold the homeland of an entire nation without legal authority. The Cherokee Constitution required approval by the National Council for any land sale. The council had never met, never voted, never authorized anything. Ross immediately organized opposition. He gathered petitions. Nearly 16,000 Cherokee, almost every man, woman, and child who could write, signed documents denouncing the treaty. He took those petitions to Washington. He lobbied senators. He gave speeches. He wrote letters. He fought with everything he had to stop ratification. The Senate debate was intense. Even some removal supporters questioned the treaty's legitimacy. It clearly didn't represent the Cherokee people. It had been negotiated with a faction lacking legal standing. Ratifying it would reward fraud. Senator Daniel Webster opposed it. Senator Henry Clay opposed it. Honoring it, they argued, would make a mockery of the entire treaty process. The vote came in May 1836. The treaty was ratified by a single vote, 31 to 29. The bare minimum required 1 vote. If one senator had changed his mind, the treaty would have failed. The Cherokee would have had more time. Andrew Jackson's term was ending. A new president might have taken a different path, but that's not what happened. The treaty passed. The countdown began. The Cherokee had 2 years. Senator Daniel Webster opposed it. Senator Henry Clay opposed it. Honoring it, they argued, would make a mockery of the entire treaty process. The vote came in May 1836. The treaty was ratified by a single vote, 31 to 29. The bare minimum required 1 vote. If one senator had changed his mind, the treaty would have failed. The Cherokee would have had more time. Andrew Jackson's term was ending. A new president might have taken a different path, but that's not what happened. The treaty passed. The countdown began. The Cherokee had 2 years. Ross didn't give up. He kept fighting, lobbying, hoping for a miracle. The new president, Martin Van Buren, Jackson's hand-picked successor, might be persuaded. Public opinion might shift. Meanwhile, the treaty party prepared to move west. They believed voluntary removal was better than forced exile. They believed acting now would let them control the process and preserve the nation in its new home. Major Ridge and his family left in 1837, a year early, to stake out good land and prepare for others. A few hundred families followed those who believed resistance was futile. They traveled on their own terms, with possessions, livestock, dignity intact. But the vast majority stayed. They stayed because Ross told them to. They stayed because they believed justice would prevail. They stayed because these mountains were their home, the home of their ancestors. Leaving felt like dying, as 1837 turned to 1838. Desperation grew. The deadline loomed. The federal government assembled troops. Stockades rose across the territory. Still, Ross fought. Still, his people waited. Imagine that, knowing soldiers were coming, knowing you had days, maybe hours, before being forced from your home at gunpoint, yet not knowing exactly when. Should you plant crops or pack? Was Ross's last-minute effort succeeding? Some buried silver and jewelry in the woods, hoping to return. Some trusted white neighbors to guard their property. Some converted everything to cash and hid it in their clothes. Others froze in place, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The cruelest twist: Georgia had already given away Cherokee land through a lottery. Before the Cherokee even left, their farms and homes were awarded to white settlers. Lottery winners arrived waving tickets, demanding Cherokee families vacate immediately. "This is mine now," they'd say. "I won it fair and square. Get out." One Cherokee woman returned to find a white family eating dinner in her house, using her dishes, sitting in her chairs, sleeping in her beds. They told her to leave. She had nowhere to go, so she stayed in her own yard, watching strangers live her life. That was the spring of 1830, a nation in limbo, a people waiting for the axe to fall, a government that had done everything right, won in the highest court, yet watched helplessly as victory meant nothing. In May, the deadline arrived. The Cherokee, who hadn't left voluntarily, were now subject to forced removal. General Winfield Scott arrived with 7,000 soldiers, 7,000 armed men, to remove a civilian population of about 14,000. Half of them women and children. Scott issued a proclamation, 1 month to prepare. But the soldiers didn't wait. The roundups began in late May. Soldiers went house to house, farm to farm. Families were given minutes to gather what they could carry, sometimes not even that. Soldiers burst in during meals, ordered everyone out at bayonet point, marched them away with food still on the table. Children were separated from parents. Elderly people who couldn't walk fast enough were prodded with rifle butts. Resistors were beaten. Cherokee were taken too hastily built. Stockades, 31 holding camps scattered across the territory. Packed in with hundreds of others, they slept on bare ground, drank dirty water, ate whatever soldiers gave them. The camps had no sanitation, no shelter from summer heat, no medicine, no privacy. Families who'd lived in comfortable homes now slept in dirt, surrounded by strangers, guarded by soldiers who saw them as problems to manage. At Rose Cottage, soldiers arrived while Ross's family ate breakfast. They gave his wife minutes to pack, then marched them away. Ross was in Washington, still lobbying, still hoping. He wouldn't learn what happened to his family for days. White looters followed the soldiers, moving into empty houses, digging up buried silver, taking livestock and furniture. Sometimes they looted while Cherokee families watched, helpless. Through June and July, the stockades filled. Thousands crammed into wooden pens in summer heat. Disease spread like fire. Dysentery from contaminated water, then measles, then whooping cough. Children and elders began dying. New graves appeared daily outside stockade walls. By some estimates, over 2,000 Cherokee died in the camps before the march even began. And through it all, John Ross kept fighting. He secured one concession. The Cherokee would organize their own removal. They'd march under their own leadership, in their own detachments, not driven like cattle by the army. It was a small victory, but it was something, a last shred of dignity in total defeat. The march was scheduled for fall, after summer heat broke. 17 detachments of about 1,000 people each would travel overland, more than 800 miles from Georgia and Tennessee, across the Mississippi into Arkansas, and finally to Indian Territory. They didn't know what awaited them. They didn't know about the winter, the harshest in living memory. They didn't know how many would die on the road. They didn't know this journey would become known by a name that echoes through history. They didn't know they were about to walk the trail of tears. But you do, lying in your warm bed. You know what's coming in. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Just like John Ross, just like the elders. Hood survived smallpox and wars and broken treaties. Now facing the end of everything they knew, some things can't be stopped. Some tragedies are too vast, too powered by greed and guns, and the indifference of those who could have helped, but chose not to. The Cherokee were about to learn that lesson in the cruelest way. The first detachment left in early October. About 1,000 Cherokee gathered from the stockades, formed into a long column, and turned west. They had wagons for the sick and elderly, a few horses and oxen, and whatever few possessions they'd grabbed when soldiers came. The route stretched over 800 miles. The journey was supposed to take 3 months. It would take far longer. The Cherokee called it Nunadal, Sunni, the trail where they cried. John Ross's concession meant they'd march under their own conductors and physicians. Ross put his brother Lewis in charge of logistics. The Cherokee were divided into 17 detachments, each departing days apart to avoid overwhelming resources along the route. The plan was sound. The execution was a nightmare. First came drought. Summer 1838 was brutally dry. Rivers were too low for ferries. Detachments waited weeks for water levels to rise. Then came winter. The winter of 1838 to 39 was one of the harshest in memory. Temperatures plunged below zero. Snow fell day after day, piling on roads and trails. Rivers that had been too shallow now froze solid, stranding detachments for days. Roads turned to rivers of frozen mud that swallowed shoes and trapped wagon wheels. And the Cherokee kept walking. Picture it, a column stretching for miles along a frozen road. Elders who'd never traveled more than a few miles from home now walked 10, 12, 15 miles a day through freezing rain and snow. Their clothes were thin-made for Georgia summers, not Arkansas winters. Shoes wore out and weren't replaced. Some wrapped rags around their feet. Some walked barefoot through snow. Mothers carried infants, breathing on tiny fingers to prevent frostbite. Children stumbled, too exhausted to cry, eyes glazed, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Old people collapsed and couldn't rise. Sometimes families stayed with them. Sometimes the column moved on, because stopping meant dying. Wagons were meant for the sick and elderly, but there were never enough. Those who should have ridden walked. Those who couldn't walk crawled. Those who couldn't crawl were left to die. Rations were inadequate, mostly salt pork and flour, never enough. People were always hungry, always cold, always exhausted. Disease traveled with them: dysentery, pneumonia, whooping cough, measles. Those who'd survived the stockades now fell ill on the trail. There was no place to stop, no medicine, no relief, only the endless road west. Every day, people died. Detachments carried their dead as long as they could, hoping to find proper burial ground. But sometimes the ground was too frozen to dig. Sometimes they left bodies beside the trail, covered with rocks to deter animals, marked with whatever they could find. A private in the Georgia militia named John Burnett was assigned to escort one detachment. Years later, as an old man, he wrote what he remembered. I saw the helpless Cherokees arrested and dragged from their homes, driven at bayonet point into the stockades, and in the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning I saw them loaded, like cattle or sheep, into 645 wagons, and started toward the west. He described what happened when winter struck. One morning, they encountered a savage sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures. From that day until the journey ended the following March, the sufferings of the Cherokees were awful. The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. Burnett couldn't forget what he'd witnessed. Decades later, guilt still haunted him. Murder is murder, he wrote, and somebody must answer. Somebody must explain the streams of blood that flowed in the Indian country in the summer of 1838. Somebody must explain the 4,000 silent graves that mark the trail of the Cherokees to their exile. One wish I could forget it all, but the picture of 645 wagons lumbering somebody must explain the 4,000 silent graves that mark the trail of the Cherokees to their exile. One wish I could forget it all, but the picture of 645 wagons lumbering over the frozen ground with their cargo of suffering humanity still lingers in my memory. 4,000 silent graves, that's how many Cherokee died on the trail itself. Add the 2,000 who perished in the stockades, and the toll reaches 6,000, out of a population of 16,000, more than 1 in 3. Among the dead was Quatty Ross. Quatty was John Ross's wife, a full-blooded Cherokee woman who had stood by him through everything: the building of Rose Cottage, their beautiful home they'd never see again, the birth of their 5 children, his endless trips to Washington, where he fought for their people while she held everything together at home, the Supreme Court victory that meant nothing, the soldiers who dragged her from her breakfast table, now in her 50s, not young, not strong. The journey was slowly killing her, as it was so many others. Yet she refused to ride in the wagons while others walked. She walked alongside her people, sharing what little she had. Somewhere in Arkansas, in the bitter cold of late January, Quatty saw a sick child, a little girl, perhaps 4 or 5, shivering in her mother's arms with nothing to keep her warm. The child's lips were blue, her eyes glassy. She was dying. Quatty took off her only blanket, the one thing keeping her alive in the freezing wind, and wrapped it around the girl. Someone tried to stop her. "You'll freeze," they warned. "The child needs it more," Quatty said. She fell ill almost immediately. The cold sank into her bones. Her cough worsened. Fever set in. Pneumonia in that frozen, wet wilderness, with no medicine, no shelter, no warmth. Pneumonia was a death sentence. Everyone knew it, including Quatty. She kept walking as long as she could. Then she couldn't anymore. Quatty Ross died somewhere on the trail, in the frozen wilderness between everything she'd known and everything that was supposed to come. Her husband wasn't there. He was with another detachment. managing the impossible logistics of moving 16,000 broken people across a continent. He learned of her death days later through a messenger who rode hard to find him. They buried her beside the trail, one more grave among thousands, one more silent marker on the road of tears. The little girl, Kwati, gave her blanket to survive, or so the story goes. Her name was lost to history, but she lived. Kwati's blanket kept her warm long enough to reach Oklahoma. John Ross would remarry years later. He would serve as principal chief for another 3 decades, guiding his people through the Civil War and its aftermath. But those who knew him said he was never quite the same after Kwati died. Something in him hardened, or perhaps something broke. He never spoke of her death. He kept it locked away, a private grief too vast for words. The detachments straggled into Indian territory. Through the winter and early spring, the last group arrived in March. They found a land unlike the Green Mountains they'd left, flat, dry, foreign. But they were alive, some of them anyway, and they were still Cherokee. The survivors tried to rebuild. They established a new capital at Tahlequah. They wrote a new constitution. They started new farms, new schools, new lives. John Ross remained principal chief, still trying to hold everything together. But old wounds hadn't healed. In June 1839, they tore open in blood. The treaty party had arrived in Indian Territory a year earlier. Major Ridge, John Ridge, Elias Boudinette and their families had settled near Honey Creek, started farms, tried to make a new beginning. They knew they weren't popular. They knew some blamed them for everything. But they thought time would heal. They were wrong. On the night of June 21st, a group of men met in secret. They drew lots to determine who would carry out the executions. 3 targets, 3 teams, 3 deaths, all to happen at dawn. John Ridge was first. In the gray light before sunrise, on June 22nd, about 25 men surrounded his house. They broke down the door, dragged him from his bed, past his screaming wife, Sarah, and terrified children. They threw him face down in the yard and stabbed him over and over. 25 men, taking turns, ensuring the blood was on all their hands, so no single killer could be named. John Ridge died in his own yard, in front of his family, torn apart by his own people. He was 36 years old. That same morning, another group waited on a road near the Cherokee border. They knew Major Ridge would travel that way. They hid in the trees. When his horse appeared, they opened fire 5 rifles at once. Major Ridge tumbled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. He was 68, his whole life spent fighting for the Cherokee, first with weapons, then with words. Neither had saved him. That afternoon, Elias Boudinette was at his new home, working on construction. 4 men approached. "We need medicine from the mission," they said. "Can you show us where it's kept?" Boudinette walked with them. Why wouldn't he? They were fellow Cherokee neighbors in this new land. When they were far enough from the house, they struck. One drove a tomahawk into Boudinette's skull from behind. As he fell, the others stabbed him with knives. They left his body in the woods, split open and bloody. He was 36, the same age as his cousin John Ridge, the man who had created the Cherokee Phoenix, who gave his people a voice, who tried so desperately to find a way forward, was dead in the dirt, killed by his own. The assassinations were carried out under the old blood law. The treaty party had sold Cherokee land without authorization. The penalty was death. The killers believed they were enforcing Cherokee law, avenging a crime that had cost their people everything. Stand Waddy, brother, had also been on the death list, but someone warned him in time. He escaped and swore revenge. For years, the Cherokee Nation tore itself apart in a low-level civil war. Treaty Party versus National Party. Assassination and counter-assassination. Ambush and revenge. Families shattered. Communities divided. Everything they'd built, everything they'd suffered to preserve, seemed to crumble. John Ross worked desperately to end the violence. He called councils, negotiated truces, pleaded with factions to remember they were all Cherokee if they wanted to survive. They had to stop killing each other. It took years, but slowly, painfully, the violence subsided. In 1846, a new treaty officially reunited the factions. The Cherokee Nation was one people against card, traumatized, but together they rebuilt. They established schools. The Cherokee Male Seminary and Cherokee Female Seminary opened in 1851, offering classical education, Latin, Greek, mathematics, literature. The Cherokee literacy rate remained among the highest in the region. They restarted their newspaper. The Cherokee Advocate began publishing in 1844. Carrying on the Phoenix's legacy, news, politics, poetry side by side in Cherokee and English. They wrote new laws, built new roads, created new farms and businesses. Within a decade of the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma was thriving again. It wasn't the same. How could it be? The mountains were gone. The sacred sites were gone. Their ancestors' graves were 1,000 miles away. An entire generation had been traumatized by horrors that would echo through descendants for centuries. But they survived. They adapted. They rebuilt. That's the thing about the Cherokee. That's the heart of this story. No matter how many times the world knocked them down, they got back up. Smallpox killed 90% of them. They rebuilt. Wars and treaties took half their land. They rebuilt. The Trail of Tears killed 1 in 3. They rebuilt. The Trail of Tears wasn't the end of Cherokee history. It was another chapter, another catastrophe survived, another resurrection begun. Lying in your comfortable bed, you might wonder how they did it, how anyone could endure such suffering and still fight, still build, still remain Cherokee. Maybe it was the clan system, that web of relationships and responsibilities that gave everyone a place and purpose. Maybe it was the old stories, the ceremonies, the going to water rituals that connected them to something larger than their pain. Maybe it was sheer stubbornness, a refusal to let those who destroyed them win. John Ross led his people for another quarter century after the Trail of Tears. He guided them through the Civil War, when they were once again caught between warring powers. He fought for their rights in Washington until the end. He died in 1866 at 76. He'd been principal chief for nearly 40 years. He'd seen his nation nearly destroyed and watched it rise again. He'd buried his first wife on a frozen trail and lived to see his grandchildren grow up in a new homeland. His last words, some say, were about his people, about the Cherokee, about the nation he'd spent his life trying to save. The Cherokee Nation he left behind wasn't perfect. It still faced challenges. The Civil War had divided them again. Federal policies threatened their sovereignty. The future was uncertain. They were still here, still Cherokee, still fighting. And that's the real story. Not just the tragedy, not just the suffering, but the survival, the resilience, the absolute refusal to disappear from the misty mountains of their ancestors to the flat plains of Oklahoma. Disease, war, removal, and civil conflict the Cherokee endured. They're still here today, still a nation, still speaking their language, still telling their stories, including this one, the trail. Where they cried became the trail where they survived. And in surviving, they proved something no treaty, no soldier, no broken promise could ever take away. They are the Onion with their principal people, and they will not vanish. The Cherokee had barely finished burying their dead when the next war. Old divisions resurfaced instantly. The wounds from the Treaty Party assassinations had never fully healed. 20 years of simmering resentment boiled over. Stand Watie, the man who escaped death in 1839, had never forgotten, never forgiven. He'd spent decades building power, nursing his grudge against John Ross and the National Party, waiting for his moment. When the Confederacy came calling, he saw his chance. He threw in with the South, raised a regiment of Cherokee cavalry, and became a Confederate officer. His men were fierce, hardened by frontier conflict. They raided Union supply lines with devastating effectiveness, burning wagon trains, capturing prisoners, vanishing into the hills before reinforcements arrived. Watie rose to brigadier general, the only Native American to achieve that rank in the Confederate Army. At 60, he was still fighting, still proving something to the men who killed his brother. Uncle and cousin John Ross, now 70, tried to stay neutral. He was tired of wars, tired of watching his people die for others' causes. He'd already buried one wife on a frozen trail. He'd already lost one homeland. The Cherokee had already lost everything once. He didn't want to lose it again, but neutrality wasn't an option. Geography made that clear. The Confederacy surrounded Cherokee territory. Union forces were hundreds of miles away. Confederate agents were blunt. Sign a treaty with us or face invasion, Ross signed. He had no real choice, but his heart was but. By 1902, they were forced to accept allotment. Their communal lands were divided. Each citizen received about 160 acres. The surplus, millions of acres, was opened to white settlement. Speculators and swindlers descended like vultures. They got Cherokee landowners drunk and had them sign papers they couldn't read. They tricked the illiterate into marking documents that signed away their land. They forged papers, bribed judges, used legal loopholes. They married Cherokee women just to claim their allotments, then abandoned them. They convinced elders to name white friends as heirs. They had elderly Cherokee declared mentally incompetent and appointed themselves guardians. Within a generation, most Cherokee land passed into white hands. Allotment didn't help. Native Americans, it stripped them of their remaining wealth and left them with almost nothing. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state. The Cherokee Nation's government was effectively dissolved. The principal chief became a ceremonial figure, appointed by the U.S. president, not elected by the people. Courts closed. Police disbanded. The nation that had survived so much was told it no longer existed. For the next 70 years, the Cherokee lived in political limbo. Historians call it the Dark Ages of Cherokee history. Their government was gone, their land fragmented and stolen, their sovereignty suppressed. On paper, the Cherokee Nation had ceased to exist, but paper doesn't capture everything. Paper doesn't capture grandmothers teaching grandchildren, Cherokee words in the kitchen. Paper doesn't capture families gathering for ceremonies. Even when the government said they couldn't, paper doesn't capture the stubborn refusal to forget. The Cherokee never disappeared. Not when disease killed 90% of them. Not when marched 1,000 miles at gunpoint. Not when their government was erased by bureaucracy. They kept meeting, kept organizing, kept teaching language and stories, kept ceremonies alive even quietly, kept waiting for the world to change. In 1970, it did. Congress passed the Principal Chiefs Act, allowing the 5 civilized tribes to elect their own leaders for the first time in over 60 years. The Cherokee held an election. A new chief was chosen by the people, not appointed by Washington. 6 years later, in 1976, the Cherokee Nation adopted a new constitution establishing executive, legislative, and judicial branches. They began rebuilding their institutions, reclaiming sovereignty, becoming a nation again. In 2003, they ratified an updated constitution that remains in effect today, a government of the Cherokee, by the Cherokee, for the Cherokee, just as John Ross envisioned nearly 2 centuries earlier. Then, in 2020, something remarkable happened. The Supreme Court took up McGirt v. Oklahoma. The question: did Congress ever officially dissolve the Muskogee Creek Nation's reservation? The court ruled no. The reservation still existed. The land was still Indian country. 2 years later, the same logic was applied to the Cherokee. Their reservation, Oklahoma, had never been legally terminated. The Cherokee Nation wasn't just a cultural organization or historical curiosity. It was a sovereign nation with territorial boundaries that had never been erased. It was Worcester v. Georgia all over again nearly 200 years later. The Supreme Court once more affirmed Cherokee sovereignty, but this time, the president didn't sneer about enforcement. This time, the ruling stood today. The Cherokee Nation is the largest federally recognized tribe in the U.S. Over 400,000 citizens worldwide. With its heart in northeastern Oklahoma, a multi-billion-dollar economy from casinos to manufacturing to healthcare, hospitals and clinics providing free medical care, schools teaching Cherokee language and culture to new generations. Sequoia's syllabary still taught Cherokee children reading and writing in their ancestors' tongue. Those 85 symbols, crafted over 12 years by one determined man, still living. There are immersion schools where children grow up speaking Cherokee as their first language, thinking in the words of their great-grandparents. There are apps, online courses, YouTube videos, all keeping the language alive. The Cherokee Nation has its own marshal service, court system, tax commission. It issues license plates, regulates businesses, provides housing assistance. It does all the things a government does because that's what it is, a government. A nation. In 2019, the Cherokee Nation appointed a delegate to the U.S. Congress, fulfilling a promise made in the 1835 treaty. Kim Teehee was nominated to represent Cherokee interests in Washington. It took nearly 200 years, but the promise made at New Ekata, that cursed treaty that cost so many lives, was finally being kept. Chuck Hoskin Jr. serves as principal chief, today elected by the Cherokee people, just as John Ross was nearly 2 centuries ago. The government Ross built, the written language Sequoia gave them, the people who survived the trail of tears, and everything after. They're still here, still governing themselves, still fighting for their rights, still Cherokee, still telling their story, lying in your comfortable bed. Think about what you've heard tonight. Think about the span of it. Thousands of years, dozens of generations, catastrophe after catastrophe, and through it all, survival. The Cherokee began in the misty Appalachians. They built towns, farms, a sophisticated civilization. They developed a clan system that guided their lives for centuries. They created ceremonies and stories that connected them to each other and to the land. Then Europeans came. Disease killed 90%. Wars took their land piece by piece. They adapted, traded, fought, and somehow kept going. When Americans said they needed to become civilized to survive, they did. They invented a written language from nothing, published a newspaper, wrote a constitution, built a republic, and it still wasn't enough. They were forced from their homeland at gunpoint. Thousands died on the trail. Everything they'd built was taken, so they built it again in a new land. Among people who tried to destroy them, they rebuilt their nation, schools, farms, government, all of it again. The Civil War tore them apart. They rebuilt, allotment stole their land. They endured. Their government was dissolved. They waited, and when the chance came, they rebuilt once more, because that's what they do. That's who they are. The Cherokee are still here because they refuse to stop being Cherokee through every disaster, every betrayal, every attempt to erase them. They held on to who they were. They passed it down language, stories, ceremonies, identity. No law could take that away. No army could destroy it. No amount of suffering could break it. That's the story of the Cherokee. Not just tragedy, though, there's plenty. Not just resilience, though, that's part of it. It's a story about what nation really is, not land which can be stolen, closing parenthesis, not government which can be dissolved, even people who can be killed. A nation is an idea, shared identity, a commitment to each other and to the generations before and after. As long as people hold on to that idea, the nation survives. The Cherokee held on through everything, and now, lying in your warm bed, in whatever town or city you call home, you're part of this story too, because you listened, you learned, you carried this history with you for a little while, and now it's yours to remember. The Cherokee called themselves Aniyunwitha, principal people, the real people, the original people. They've earned that name 1,000 times over. Outside your window, the world is quiet now. The stories are finished for tonight. The history can rest, and so can you. Think about those misty mountains. If you wish, think about the sacred fires that never went out, even when everything else was lost. Think about sequoia scratching marks on bark, year after year, refusing to give up. Think about Quadi giving her blanket to a cold child, knowing the cost. Think about what it means to survive, to rebuild, to hold on to who you are. When the whole world tries to take it away, then let it all go. Soft and hazy like morning mist on ancient mountains, let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift. The Cherokee are still here, still telling their stories, still teaching their children, still remembering where they came from. And now, you'll remember to sleep well. Dream of misty mountains and sacred fires. Dream of people who refuse to vanish. Dream of survival.